Hi, my name is Dr. Kelly King, and I'm a licensed addiction counselor in the state of Colorado. I'm really passionate about working with the addiction and recovery population, and I really wanted to hop on here and share some of the common myths that we often see about addiction, about working with folks in addiction, and really some of these myths can prevent people from actually seeking out treatment. It also can really impact the care that is received within treatment programs, especially if we have providers or other staff members who really believe that these myths are true. So I really wanted to hop on and just kind of talk a little bit about some of the myths and give a little bit of information about why they're not true. So the first myth that I would like to debunk today is that addiction is a choice. Now, I know that this is really difficult for folks to kind of wrap their head around, especially if they're not as familiar with addiction or don't really know the science behind addiction. And to me, that makes perfect sense of why it's difficult. At the root of addiction are sets of behaviors that's really hard to comprehend or maybe understand. How is it possible that these behaviors are not intentional? So when I say behaviors, I mean like that behavior to go and use, or that behavior to those behaviors that surround kind of putting ourselves in really high risk, really difficult situations. Um, it's hard to understand or even fathom how those aren't choices. Now, one thing that I'm not going to talk about much today or go into a lot of detail today is the different models of addiction. There's so many different models of addiction and ways of thinking about addiction. And so, we've got the moral model, the disease model, the social model, the psychological model. And so I'm not going to go into detail about all of those today, but what this shows us is how multifaceted addiction is. That's not typically just caused by one thing. It's not typically just genetic, although that might play a part in it. It's not just our social situations, but that might play a part in it. It's not just our environment, but it might. It's not just our mental health and our psychological state, but that might play a role in it. So there might be some bits of truth to all of these different models that we have out there, and there's some research to suggest that. However, the most credible model of addiction that's out there and supported by the most research, especially recent research, is the disease model of addiction. So, the disease model of addiction suggests, or there's research to support, that it is a progressive brain disease, which means that it impacts our brain functioning and our brain chemistry. It also suggests that addiction is progressive, which means that it gets progressively worse over time. It also can be cyclical in nature, where we often will see periods of sobriety and relapse, and sobriety maintenance again, and relapse again. And the other part of that, kind of going back to the progressive piece, is typically when somebody chooses to stop using and go get some help. And maybe they've had some sobriety time of 10, 15, 20 years. If that person decides to go back out and use again, what we typically see is that person kind of picks right back up where they left off. So typically when we cross that line into addiction, we can't go backwards. And so typically once we've kind of gotten to that point, we may need some additional support, whether that's through treatment, through counseling, through the 12-step community, whatever that might be, to really help us to get back on track. So the next myth that I would like to debunk is that you have to hit rock bottom in order to get help. So some people believe that you have to hit some point of severe crisis in life before you can seek help for an addiction, or before that help would be effective. Um, and we do often see people seek treatment for an addiction after they've had something really significantly bad happen in their life. Maybe they experienced, maybe they have cirrhosis of the liver and only have been given a year to live, or maybe their entire family's not talking to them anymore and has cut them out because of their addiction and because of their use. Maybe they have really stacked up a lot of legal issues because of their addiction, and they've really, now they have 5 felonies on their record, and they don't know if they'll ever be able to be employed again. Now, yes, most certainly these things happen, and usually it is some type of negative consequence that happens that really drives someone into treatment. If everything was so great about our drinking, we would never seek treatment for it because we would have no reason to. We wouldn't want to stop it. So usually it is a negative consequence that happens or something that is troubling to us that makes us want to go and stop. Now, the thing that I want to debunk is that it doesn't have to be in this severe crisis type of state for us to seek help for an addiction issue. So I'm going to give you an example. Say that we've got someone who's married and they've just been drinking quite a few beers after work every night. Nothing really too big has happened yet, but they're starting to notice that there's a pattern, and that as soon as they get off work at night, they really start to get an urge to go and grab a beer out of the fridge. And then it started to escalate a little bit more to where they were sitting outside at night and they'd drink 3 or 4 beers before they'd go to bed. And then maybe it got to a point where it was really starting to interfere with this person's life, and they stopped having dinner with their family, and um, it really started to impact their social life. And maybe their partner comes to them and says, "Hey, I'm really starting to get concerned about your drinking. We really need to talk about that." So this would be an example of maybe someone deciding to seek help at an earlier stage of addiction. So this person still has their family. They still are trusted by their family. They still have their job and they're gainfully employed. They still have their house. They still have their health. They still have all of these things that are still positive in their lives. But the drinking has started to cause some distress, and maybe their partner confronts them and they decide to make a change. So this would be an example of someone maybe not having to hit some type of severe crisis or rock bottom before they decide to make a change. And we most certainly hope that people do make changes or seek help earlier on in the process, because once that dependency has happened and there's been a lot of negative consequences for use, that recovery process can be a little bit more difficult. The final myth that I would like to debunk today is that addiction only affects certain types of people. So there's a common misconception out there that addiction only impacts specific demographics. So such as those that are maybe in a lower socioeconomic status, or folks that have certain personality characteristics, things like that. And I'm here to tell you that addiction has no boundaries. Addiction could impact anyone. It is a human condition that could impact any human being on the planet. In my time in working with addiction, I have worked with folks in higher socioeconomic status, lower socioeconomic status, different cultures, different races, different ethnicities, different religions. It just shows how prevalent the issues really are. And if you really think about the different potential roots of addiction, they're endless. Endless. I can't even like highlight that enough. Endless. But we've got trauma, we've got mental health issues, we've got health issues, physical health issues, we've got environmental challenges, we've got discrimination, we've got all kinds of issues that might be at the root of addiction. And yes, while those issues might vary depending on some of these different characteristics, there is no human that walks this planet who doesn't have the potential to develop an addiction. And we most certainly see that every day in addiction treatment, in terms of addiction knows no boundaries and anyone could potentially be subject to it. So thanks for joining me today to debunk some myths about addiction and recovery. I'll see you next time on Therapist Things with Dr. King.